She could not afford a lawyer. Her husband knew it. His attorney knew it. And everyone sitting in family courtroom 6 could see it the second Mira Dawson took her seat alone. Grant Dawson noticed it first. Of course he did. Grant always noticed weakness first. That had been one of the qualities people admired about him in business and feared about him in private. He could scan a room in seconds and decide who mattered, who could help him, who could be ignored, and who could be pushed until they folded. It was one of the reasons his real estate company had grown so fast. It was also one of the reasons his marriage had collapsed so quietly that almost no one understood how much damage had been done before the papers were ever filed. That morning, he sat at the petitioner's table in a dark, tailored suit, his cufflinks flashing every time he moved his hand. Beside him sat Nolan Pierce, a polished family attorney with silver hair, perfect posture, and the kind of billing rate designed to discourage hope in the other side. Grant looked rested, expensive, in control. He had the expression of a man who already believed the next hour belonged to him. Mira looked like none of those things. She sat at the respondent's table with a plain black tote bag, a stack of documents clipped with colored tabs, and a second-hand blazer she had ironed before sunrise in the cramped apartment she could barely afford. Her hair was tied back neatly. There was no designer handbag, no team of associates, no dramatic entrance, no performance. Just a woman sitting very still, as if stillness itself had become a form of armor. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and recycled air. Clerks moved papers from one side of the bench to the other. A bailiff stood by the wall with the patient expression of someone who had watched hundreds of families come apart in quiet public stages. The benches behind them slowly filled with a few waiting observers, 2 law students, an older woman from Grant's side of the family, and one reporter who had no real story yet, only the instinct that wealthy divorces sometimes broke open in interesting ways. Mira kept her eyes on the bench. She had learned that looking at Grant too much was dangerous. Not because he frightened her the way he used to. That part had faded. But because his face still carried all the old tricks. The slight smile meant to make her doubt herself. The casual shrug that suggested she was overreacting. The polished patience that made him look reasonable while she looked emotional. The look he gave her when he wanted her to feel late, underprepared, smaller than the room. For years, that look had worked. Today, it didn't. All rise. Judge Helena Ruiz entered with quick, efficient steps, black robe moving behind her like a warning. She was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed, disciplined, and known for disliking 2 things above almost everything else: dishonesty and showmanship. Lawyers who practiced regularly in her courtroom learned fast that polished language would not save weak facts. She sat, reviewed the file, adjusted her glasses, and looked down with a level calm that immediately changed the air in the room. "Be seated." The room settled. Judge Ruiz opened the case with the efficient rhythm of someone who had no intention of wasting anyone's time. The matter before the court involved dissolution of marriage, temporary custody, support, and preliminary division of assets. Grant Dawson was seeking primary physical custody of the children, exclusive use of the marital residence, and interim control over several jointly held financial accounts connected to what his attorney described as his long-standing role as sole provider. Nolan Pierce stood first. He spoke smoothly, with sympathy in all the right places and precision everywhere else. According to him, Grant Dawson had spent the last year trying to preserve stability for the children after Mira unexpectedly removed herself from the marital home. Grant had maintained school expenses, medical coverage, mortgage obligations, household staff, and the children's daily routine, while Mira's financial and emotional instability had made consistency difficult. Nolan emphasized that Mira had no counsel, inconsistent income, and no reliable long-term housing plan. He said this carefully, as if he regretted saying it, which somehow made it colder. Grant did not speak, but his face did. His expression carried that faint, satisfied patience of a man listening to a version of events he had personally rehearsed into the world so many times it had started sounding true even to him. When Nolan finished, Judge Ruiz made a note and looked at Mira. "Mrs. Dawson, are you appearing pro se today?" "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice was steady, not loud, not trembling. Steady. The judge nodded once. "You may respond." Mira rose slowly, not because she was afraid, but because she had promised herself she would never rush in his presence again. "Your Honor, I understand how this looks," she said. "My husband has counsel. I do not. My husband has greater visible resources. I do not. But I dispute the claim that I abandoned my children, and I dispute the claim that Mr. Dawson has presented a complete picture of our finances or our family life." Nolan Pierce remained composed. Grant leaned back in his chair. Mira continued. "For 12 years, I managed the administrative side of my husband's life and much of his business informally. I handled vendor schedules, household payroll, school communication, appointment calendars, travel confirmations, insurance paperwork, and day-to-day family logistics while he expanded his company. I also raised our children. If something in that home functioned smoothly, I touched it somehow." She let that sit for one beat. When the separation happened, access to shared resources changed almost immediately. I was locked out of several accounts. My name was removed from household authorizations. I was left trying to rebuild while also trying to remain present for my son and daughter. I am not asking this court for sympathy. I am asking this court to look beyond appearances." Grant smiled. It was small, but Mira saw it. That smile had always meant he thought he was winning. Judge Ruiz asked, "Do you have supporting documents for the claims you're making?" "Yes, Your Honor." Mira placed one hand on the black tote beside her chair. That was the moment Grant made his mistake. He leaned toward Nolan, but not quietly enough. "She brought a tote bag," he said with a low laugh. "What is this, a parent-teacher conference?" Several people in the gallery shifted. Nolan kept his face forward and murmured, "Stop talking." Grant didn't. "With respect, Your Honor, we all know what this is. She can't afford proper representation, and now she's going to throw paper at the room and hope emotion fills the gaps." The silence that followed felt like something cold entering through an open door. Judge Ruiz looked at him once. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "you will let your counsel speak." Grant lifted both hands as if he meant no harm, but the smirk stayed. Mira did not look at him. That, more than anything, unsettled him. She looked only at the judge. And because the room had reached that exact point where arrogance starts sounding uglier than intended, the shift in power was almost audible. If you like story, please subscribe my channel for more videos. Judge Ruiz folded her hands. "Mrs. Dawson," she said, "submit what you have." Mira opened the tote and pulled out not a random stack, but a carefully organized set of folders, a flash drive, and a printed index sheet clipped to the front. The bailiff brought them to the bench. Judge Ruiz reviewed the index in silence. Grant's expression changed a fraction.
just enough for Mira to notice. Not fear, not yet. Confusion. Because this was not what he expected. He expected mess.
He expected scattered papers, emotional journaling, screenshots without dates, printouts without order, desperate fragments. He expected the version of her he had described to everyone else. Overwhelmed, disorganized, trying to improvise dignity in a room built for professionals. Instead, Judge Ruiz was looking at a clean evidence list with numbered tabs, date ranges, financial references, school records, child care logs, property maintenance invoices, and digital storage certifications. Nolan noticed it too. He sat a little straighter. Judge Ruiz lifted the top page, then glanced down at the flash drive. "What is Exhibit 9? Mira answered. "A recovered cloud archive from our former home system, Your Honor. Date stamped 6 weeks before separation." Nolan rose immediately. "Your Honor, before any digital material is reviewed, we object, pending foundation and authenticity." Mira spoke before the objection could fully settle. "I included the chain of custody affidavit from the service provider and the account recovery record in tab 2. Judge Ruiz found the affidavit, read the first paragraph, then the second. The courtroom became very still. Grant's face lost another degree of color. Judge Ruiz looked toward the clerk's monitor station and said 4 words that changed everything. "Play Exhibit 9 now." The audio that filled the room was not dramatic at first, just the dull sound of glassware, a chair moving, someone walking through a kitchen. Then Grant's voice, clear, casual, confident. "Move the harbor invoices to Vail Management before mediation. If Mira sees the actual numbers, she'll ask questions she can't afford to chase." No one breathed. Another voice answered, male, younger, his operations manager. "What about the nanny logs?" Grant laughed. "Use the school pickup sheets from spring. The judge won't dig that far. She doesn't have the money for that kind of fight." The clip ended. For a moment, the courtroom held a silence so complete it felt physical. Nolan Pierce stood frozen. Grant looked as if the floor beneath his chair had shifted 2 inches to the left, and only he had noticed. The older woman in the gallery, his aunt, lowered her eyes. Judge Ruiz removed her glasses. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "explain to me why your client's informal prediction about what this court would or would not examine is now part of my mourning." Nolan swallowed once. "Your Honor, we would need time to review the full context of that clip." Judge Ruiz turned to Mira. "Mrs. Dawson, how did you obtain this archive?" "It came from the home system account that remained in my name for cloud backup, Your Honor. I did not access the property. I accessed stored records tied to a lawful account recovery after I discovered household payroll and vendor records no longer matched what had been represented to me." Grant shot to his feet. "This is insane. That clip is being twisted." Judge Ruiz's gaze cut toward him. "Sit down." He sat, not because he wanted to, because for the first time that morning, he realized he had lost control of the pace. Judge Ruiz reviewed more documents: school attendance logs, pickup authorizations, staff payment summaries, house manager schedules. The reality forming on paper was far less flattering than the story Nolan had told minutes earlier. On several weeks when Grant claimed to be the parent holding everything together, he had been out of state. On multiple school days he claimed to have handled personally, hired staff had signed the children out. Invoices routed through one of his business entities appeared to cover expenses that looked personal, not corporate. Judge Ruiz made notes for nearly a full minute. Then she looked up. "This court is not making final determinations today," she said. "But based on what I have heard and reviewed, I find significant cause for concern regarding the accuracy of the petitioner's current representations." Grant's jaw tightened. Mira remained still. Judge Ruiz continued. "Temporary exclusive control of disputed accounts is denied. A temporary freeze will be placed on any asset transfers above routine living expenses until expanded disclosure is complete. Both parties will submit full financial records within 7 days. The court will also appoint a neutral forensic reviewer for preliminary tracing." Grant stared. He had come in expecting a quick victory. He was leaving with a freeze order. "And as for temporary parenting time," Judge Ruiz said, glancing at the school logs again, "I am maintaining the current equal schedule until this court has clearer facts, but I am adding a communication order. Neither party will discuss litigation details with the children. If I find evidence of coaching, narrative manipulation, or interference, I will respond strongly. Am I understood?" Mira answered first. "Yes, Your Honor." Grant took 1 second too long. Then, "Yes, Your Honor." "Good," said Judge Ruiz. "We reconvene in 8 days." The gavel fell. The room broke into whispers so fast it felt like a wall cracking. Grant turned to Nolan the second the judge exited. "What was that?" Nolan was already collecting papers with clipped, irritated movements. "That," he said quietly, "was the sound of you ignoring every warning I gave you." "But that audio exists," Nolan said, "which is currently the bigger problem." Across the aisle, Mira placed her documents back in order, one measured motion at a time. No shaking hands, no dramatic smile, no glance in Grant's direction. She clipped the folders closed, slid the flash drive into a small case, and lifted the tote. Grant couldn't stand it. "Mira." She looked at him then, only once, and it hit him harder than the audio had, because her face held no anger at all, only distance. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. Mira adjusted the tote strap on her shoulder. "Long enough to stop being afraid of you." Then she walked out. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt brighter than the room she had just left. But Mira's knees still went weak the second the doors closed behind her. She moved to the nearest bench, sat down, and finally let herself breathe properly. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her daughter, Lucy. "How did court go?" Mira stared at the screen for a second before answering. "One step at a time, baby. I'll call you tonight." A second message came from her son, Eli, only 9 years old and always shorter with words. "You okay?" That nearly broke her. She typed back, "Yes, more than okay." She set the phone down in her lap and looked out through the long courthouse windows at the traffic below. 8 days. 8 days until the next hearing. 8 days for Grant to realize the woman he had written off as helpless had been rebuilding in silence while he was busy narrating her downfall to anyone willing to listen. And what almost no one knew, not even Lucy and Eli, was that the real rebuilding had started long before the divorce filing. It started the night Mira sat alone on the edge of the guest room bed in their old house, while Grant took a business dinner that lasted until 1:30 in the morning. The children were asleep. The house was silent. The dinner on the stove had gone cold. And Mira, who had spent years organizing every moving piece of his world, opened his calendar to reschedule a morning meeting for him the way she had done hundreds of times before.
That was when she saw the duplicate entries. Vendor lunches that matched no vendor invoices. Renovation meetings for properties his company did not own. Transfers to contractors she had never approved through household review. Tiny things, really. The kind of things most people would miss. But Mira had spent 12 years running logistics. She knew what normal looked like. And once she started noticing what was not normal, she could not stop.
After the separation, when the money tightened and the performance of civility vanished, those old questions returned with sharper edges. Grant had changed passwords, moved funds, restricted access, and told everyone she had become too emotional to manage practical matters. The words followed her into every room. Mutual friends repeated them with concern disguised as sympathy. Even some family members suggested she take the generous settlement he offered and focus on healing. Healing, she learned, was a word people often used when they wanted a woman to stop digging. Instead, she went to work. Not glamorous work, not cinematic work, real work. She picked up morning shifts cataloging donations at the Public Library Foundation because it gave her flexible hours. She handled evening bookkeeping for a neighborhood tax office. She took remote certification courses in forensic bookkeeping and digital record recovery at night after the children slept on the sofa bed in her one-bedroom apartment. She stopped buying coffee outside. She learned how to stretch groceries, how to say no without apologizing, how to read bank trails the way some people read weather. She also learned silence. Silence, when used correctly, was not surrender. It was storage. Over 2 years, she stored everything. Vendor inconsistencies, expense trails, childcare invoices, calendar exports, smart home backups Grant forgot existed, audio clips recovered from archived cloud files, text messages in which he discussed timing support decisions around hearings, emails forwarded automatically because one shared property utility account still mirrored specific payment alerts to an address he never remembered to remove. By the time the divorce case formally reached court, Mira had something far more dangerous than anger. She had patience attached to proof. That same afternoon, she drove from the courthouse to a modest office on the 4th floor of an old brick building downtown. The door read Salazar Financial Review. Inside, Rita Salazar, the neutral forensic reviewer appointed by the court for preliminary assessment, was already waiting. Rita was not flashy. Mid-50s, sharp haircut, plain glasses, no wasted movement. She had spent 25 years untangling messy divorce finances, concealed business revenue, shell vendor games, and the endless creativity of people who believed money could tell one story while records told another. Mira handed over a second folder. Rita flipped through it, pausing at the harbor invoices. He routed landscaping and interior staging under commercial maintenance? Mira nodded. That's what it looks like. But the staged units were personal rentals tied to properties not listed in the first disclosure. Rita glanced up. You're not guessing? No. Rita read another page. And you learned all this while working 2 jobs? Mira gave the faintest, tired smile. I had help from insomnia. Rita almost smiled back. Good, because if this is what it looks like, your husband has not merely been sloppy, he has been confident. Confident people leave patterns. Meanwhile, across town in Nolan Pierce's office, Grant was learning the cost of confidence from the opposite side. He stood by the window with both hands on his hips, looking down at the city he had spent years mastering deal by deal. Nolan sat behind his desk, jacket off now, reading through the transcript request with a face that had gone from polished to grim. Tell me everything, Nolan said.
I already did.
Nolan looked up slowly. No. You told me what you thought I needed to manage perception. I am now asking for facts. Grant exhaled sharply. There are no hidden accounts. Nolan slid the audio transcript across the desk. You are literally on record discussing moved invoices before mediation. That was internal allocation. Then explain it. Grant looked away. Nolan stood. Listen carefully. If there is anything else, shell vendors, deferred compensation, reimbursements, family-held entities, employee housing arrangements, anything, I need to know now. Not tomorrow. Not after the next hearing. Now. Grant hesitated. And in that hesitation, Nolan got his answer. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Grant rubbed his forehead. It's not what you think. That sentence is never followed by good news. There's a holding company in my sister's name, temporary, for a redevelopment purchase that stalled. Nolan went completely still. How much? Not much. How much? Grant said the number. Nolan shut his eyes for 1 full second. When he opened them, the patience was gone. You came into court today mocking a woman for being poor while sitting on undeclared holding structures? It's not personal money. In family court, Nolan snapped, everything becomes personal money if it was built, funded, maintained, or disguised during a marriage. Grant pulled at his tie. She was never supposed to find any of this. Nolan stared at him. And because he was too experienced to waste outrage on a sentence that revealing, he only said, That is the most expensive assumption you have ever made. Back at the apartment, Mira kept her promise and called the children that night. Lucy answered first. Did Dad win? Mira leaned back in the kitchen chair, closing her eyes for a second. Court isn't really about winning like that. There was a pause. He said you're making everything harder. The words stung, not because she hadn't expected them, but because children repeat the exact shape of adult harm with frightening accuracy. Mira kept her voice warm. Sometimes when grown-ups are scared, they say things in a way that isn't fair. What matters is that I love you, and I'm showing up. That part doesn't change. Lucy's voice softened. Are you still coming Friday? Of course. Eli came on the line next. Mom? Yeah, baby? Are you fighting Dad? Mira looked down at the court notes spread across the table. I'm telling the truth, she said. And sometimes that can feel like a fight to people who don't want to hear it. Eli was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that nearly undid her. Did I do something? No. The answer came out too fast, too sharp with feeling. Mira softened. No, sweetheart. None of this is because of you or Lucy. Not one piece of it. After the call, she cried for exactly 4 minutes. Not because she was weak. Because crying, too, had become something she did on a schedule so it would not interrupt the work. The next 6 days moved like a tightening wire. Rita traced transfers through harbor management, then through a maintenance subcontractor, then into a holding company registered under Grant's sister, Vanessa. From there, payments split into 2 directions: property-related expenses that had never been listed in the marital disclosure, and private account deposits that looked far too clean to be accidental. The amounts were not cartoonishly huge, which made them more believable and more dangerous. This was not fantasy hidden treasure. It was disciplined concealment.
reimbursements disguised as business operations, lifestyle support hidden inside company flow, selective omission. Worse than the money, in Judge Ruiz's eyes, would likely be the parenting narrative. School sign-out logs contradicted Grant's statements about regular pickups. Nanny records showed he had been absent on several nights he claimed to have handled bedtime, homework, and dinner. One former house manager, quietly contacted through Rita's office, confirmed that staff had been instructed to refer to Grant as the stable parent in any future legal interviews. Another former employee refused to sign an affidavit but admitted off the record that Grant often referred to the children as optics when discussing scheduling around hearings and public events. Mira listened to all of it with a strange kind of numbness.
A year earlier, each new discovery would have shocked her. Now, it simply arranged itself beside the rest. She was beyond surprise. What still hurt was something else. The steady realization that Grant had not only underestimated her, he had underestimated what the children would eventually understand. He thought the performance would hold because children are young and judges are busy, and most women, once exhausted enough, take the fastest exit they can afford. He had built his strategy on fatigue. He had not expected endurance. The night before the emergency hearing, Grant left a voicemail. At first, Mira considered deleting it unheard. Then she listened. His voice was softer than usual, which was always a warning. "Mira, this is getting out of hand. We can still settle this quietly. We don't need people crawling through everything. It's bad for the kids. Call me back." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just repositioning. Framing exposure as her aggression. Damage as her decision. She deleted the message and turned back to the stack of exhibits. By Saturday morning, the courthouse carried that charged, waiting energy that always comes before public embarrassment. A few more reporters had appeared. Nothing national, nothing dramatic, but enough for local attention. A successful developer, a family court dispute, hidden financial structures, a recovered home system recording. It had the kind of shape that drew cameras. Mira wore a charcoal suit she had bought 2 months earlier from a consignment shop after deciding she was done looking apologetic for surviving. Grant looked worse than before. Still expensive, still well-dressed, but thinner somehow. As if in just over a week, certainty had started burning through him from the inside. Judge Ruiz entered, and the room rose. When everyone sat, she went directly to the issue. "I have reviewed supplemental filings, preliminary tracing materials, and the parties' amended disclosures." Her tone alone made Nolan Pierce straighten. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "your client's updated documents raise more questions than they answer." Nolan stood. "Your Honor, we are continuing to cooperate and—" Judge Ruiz lifted one hand. "You are continuing to react. There is a difference." Rita testified first. Calm, methodical, precise. She explained the invoice rerouting, the holding company, the staggered transfers, the selective omission of property-related expenses, the household support charges billed through business channels. She did not speculate. She simply laid facts beside one another until the shape became impossible to ignore. Then came the staff records. Then the school logs. Then the timeline comparison between Grant's claimed parenting role and his actual travel dates. At one point, Judge Ruiz asked the question no one in the room wanted to hear answered. "Ms. Salazar, in your professional opinion, do the disclosure inconsistencies appear accidental?" Rita said, "Not based on the pattern and repetition I reviewed, Your Honor." Grant shut his eyes briefly. Mira did not move. Nolan tried to salvage what he could. He argued that businesses often create messy records, that personal and corporate expense categorization can become blurred during transitions, that the court should avoid drawing extreme conclusions before full audit. Judge Ruiz listened. Then she turned to Grant. "Mr. Dawson, I want a direct answer. Did you or did you not authorize payments through Harbor Management for expenses that were not fully disclosed in your initial filing?" Grant stood. His voice came out tighter than he expected. "I relied on staff and accounting summaries." Judge Ruiz did not blink. "That was not the question." Nolan quietly said, "Answer carefully." Grant looked at Mira. That was another mistake, because for a second, just 1 second, the mask slipped, and everyone in the room saw what Mira had lived with for years. Not a man caught in confusion, but a man furious that someone he dismissed had become difficult to contain. "Yes," he said, "but not in the way it's being presented." Judge Ruiz made a note. The sound of her pen on paper felt louder than it should have. "There will be a full audit," she said, "at your expense, effective immediately. There will also be sanctions for incomplete and misleading disclosure to date." Grant's mother gasped quietly from the second row. A reporter in the back started writing faster. Judge Ruiz was not finished. "With respect to interim custody, this court is increasingly concerned not merely by the financial concealment, but by the petitioner's effort to shape an image of parental involvement contradicted by neutral records. Stability is not a slogan, Mr. Dawson. It is conduct." Grant's face changed. That line landed where money could not protect him, because money arguments were numbers. Parenting arguments were identity. Judge Ruiz looked down at the child communication records, then back at him. "I am issuing a temporary order expanding Mrs. Dawson's weekday parenting time pending final determination. Further, both parties and any household staff are prohibited from discussing legal strategy or fault narratives with the children. Any violation will matter." Mira felt the breath leave her body slowly. It was not victory, not yet. But it was recognition. Recognition, after years of being narrated by someone else, can feel almost violent in its relief. The hearing ended in controlled chaos. Reporters pushed closer outside. Microphones lifted. Questions flew toward Grant first, then Mira. "Mr. Dawson, are the allegations true? Mrs. Dawson, do you believe your husband hid money intentionally? Do these findings affect your custody position?" Grant walked past without answering. Mira stopped for only 1 moment. She looked tired, composed, and far older in strength than she had looked 2 weeks earlier. "This is not about punishment," she said. "It is about truth, responsibility, and making sure my children grow up in a home where reality does not depend on who has the louder voice." That clip ran on local news that evening. Lucy saw it before Mira could prepare her. The text came just after 7. "Mom, did Dad lie?" Mira sat on the edge of the couch for a long time before answering. She finally wrote, "Adults sometimes make choices they later have to answer for. I love you." That part is still simple. Lucy did not reply for several minutes. Then, "Okay." It was a small message, but Mira understood children well enough to hear the heartbreak inside it. Sunday passed in paperwork, quiet panic, and preparation. The final hearing was set for Monday morning. Rita's complete report arrived after midnight. Nolan Pierce filed 3 objections and 1 late attempt to narrow the financial scope. Judge Ruiz denied the narrowing request before court opened. On Monday, the city woke under a gray sky and cold wind. Mira dressed in the small bedroom of her apartment, while the mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized from the one who had left Grant's house with 2 suitcases and a stunned daughter asking where they would sleep. That woman had cried in grocery aisles because cereal prices felt insulting. This woman knew how to build an exhibit binder. That mattered. At the courthouse, her sister embraced her hard enough to make her laugh for the first time in days. Her mother held both her hands and whispered, "Whatever happens, look at what you already did." Rita nodded to her from the hallway. Even the bailiff gave her the kind of neutral, professional kindness reserved for people who clearly understood the stakes. Grant arrived last. He had that look some men get when consequences have finally become visible enough to alter posture. He was still attractive, still polished, still the kind of man strangers might instinctively trust in an elevator. But the ease was gone. He looked like someone wearing the memory of power, rather than the thing itself. Judge Ruiz took the bench at exactly 9. The room stood, then sat. She reviewed her notes, looked at both parties, and began. This court has considered the testimony, disclosures, amended disclosures, school records, staff records, digital archives, preliminary forensic findings, and the conduct of both parties throughout these proceedings. The air in the room tightened. "First," she said, "regarding credibility." No one moved. The petitioner presented himself as the singular stable parent and sole transparent financial actor in this family. The record does not support either claim. Grant stared straight ahead. Judge Ruiz continued. The respondent appeared without retained counsel, but with organized evidence, corroborated records, and a consistent account of family operations. Her presentation has been materially supported by neutral documentation. Mira lowered her eyes for 1 second. Not in weakness, in gratitude that she did not need to prove she was reasonable anymore. The record had done it for her. Judge Ruiz moved to custody first. The court finds that both children benefit from meaningful relationships with both parents. However, meaningful is not the same as performative. Stability is measured by truthfulness, consistency, and the willingness to place a child's emotional well-being above personal image. Grant's attorney wrote something quickly, then stopped when he realized there was nothing useful to do with that sentence. Accordingly, Judge Ruiz said, primary physical custody is awarded to Mrs. Dawson. Mr. Dawson will have structured parenting time on alternating weekends, 1 overnight midweek, shared holidays, and expanded summertime contingent on compliance with communication and counseling conditions. Joint legal custody will remain, but educational and medical scheduling authority will temporarily rest with Mrs. Dawson in the event of unresolved conflict. Grant closed his eyes. His mother began crying silently behind him. Mira felt Lucy and Eli's faces flash through her mind so vividly it hurt. Movie nights in the small apartment. Homework at the kitchen table. Eli asleep with his shoes still on. Lucy pretending not to be excited about painting her own wall if they ever got a place with a second bedroom. Then Judge Ruiz turned to financial division. Due to the petitioner's incomplete disclosures, rerouted expenses, concealed holdings, and the litigation cost created by those omissions, the court finds an unequal distribution appropriate. Nolan Pierce stood halfway. "Your Honor." "Sit down, Mr. Pierce." He sat. The judge did not look at him again. The marital home will be sold. Net proceeds will be distributed 65% to Mrs. Dawson and 35% to Mr. Dawson. All concealed or partially concealed holdings identified through audit shall be included in the marital estate. Mrs. Dawson is awarded a greater share of liquid assets presently traceable, along with reimbursement of forensic review costs and interim sanctions previously ordered. Grant's breathing changed. Mira heard it from across the room. Judge Ruiz continued with the same calm force. Child support will be recalculated based on corrected income. Spousal support is awarded for a limited term in light of the respondent's reduced earning history during the marriage and her contribution to the petitioner's career and household operations. Further, this court orders both parties into co-parenting counseling, with specific emphasis on narrative boundaries and shielding the children from adult grievance. Then, Judge Ruiz placed both hands on the bench and looked directly at Grant. What she said next would be repeated by reporters, by relatives, by lawyers over lunch, and by Grant himself in the dark at 3 a.m. for a very long time. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "you did not lose this case because your wife brought a tote bag and a flash drive. You lost it because you mistook her lack of money for a lack of ability." No one in that courtroom breathed properly for 3 full seconds. It was not theatrical. It was devastating because it was true. Judge Ruiz was still not finished. You built your position on appearance. She built hers on evidence. You relied on assumptions about what she could not chase. She learned how to chase it. You attempted to reduce her value by narrowing the room she had to stand in. Instead, she used that room to rebuild. This court does not overlook that. Mira felt tears rise and fought them back, not because tears were weakness, but because she wanted to hear every last word clearly. Judge Ruiz gathered the final page. Let the record reflect that dignity does not announce itself with the higher invoice, the better suit, or the louder confidence. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carries its own documents, and waits for the truth to catch up. The gavel came down. Case concluded. For a moment, no one moved. Then, the room exhaled all at once. Grant remained seated, looking not angry at first, but emptied. Nolan leaned toward him to say something, but Grant seemed not to hear. His aunt covered her mouth. His mother looked between him and Mira, as if only now realizing how little she had actually understood about their marriage, their home, or the story her nephew had fed the family at holidays. Mira stood carefully because her legs had gone strangely light. Her sister reached her first, then her mother. Rita shook her hand once, firmly, and said, "You did the hard part before today." That was true. The courtroom only witnessed the ending. The real hard part had happened in the unseen years. The rent notices, the split grocery budgets, the children asking when they could go home, the night classes, the spreadsheets, the humiliation of being discussed as if she were unstable by people who had never seen her hold an entire household together before sunrise. The hard part was rebuilding privately while being misdescribed publicly. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. Mira almost kept walking. Then she stopped, because she understood something now. Silence had saved her when she was gathering strength, but voice mattered when the truth finally had room. "How do you feel today, Mrs. Dawson?" Mira looked at the cameras, then past them, as if speaking not only to the people recording, but to someone miles away, sitting in a car, in a rented room, in a borrowed bed, wondering whether survival could ever turn into something larger. "I feel relieved," she said. "Not because a marriage ended. That grief happened long before today. I feel relieved because the truth stayed standing. And for anyone watching this who has been told they are too broke, too late, too overwhelmed, or too small to defend themselves, please remember that being underestimated can become its own kind of advantage if you use the time well." That quote traveled even farther than the first one. By evening, friends she had not heard from in years were messaging. Former neighbors, old co-workers. One woman from the children's previous school, whom Mira barely knew, sent a single line that made her sit down and cry again. "I thought I was the only one starting over with nothing. Thank you." Late that night, after the calls stopped and the apartment finally quieted, Mira sat at the kitchen table alone. The same table where she had built binders, paid bills, cried over child schedules, studied invoice structures, and taught Eli multiplication while soup simmered on the stove. The final order lay in front of her. She touched the paper, but did not pick it up. Instead, she looked around. The apartment still had worn cabinets and mismatched chairs. The hallway light still flickered. The second bedroom she wanted for the children still did not exist yet. Her life had not turned magically glamorous in one afternoon, but something far more important had changed. She no longer felt temporary inside her own future. Her phone buzzed. "Lucy, can I call?" Mira answered immediately. Her daughter's voice came through quietly, carefully. "Dad said we'll be with you most of the time now." Mira's throat tightened. "Yes." Another pause. "Are you happy?" Mira looked at the court order again, then at the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator. "I'm peaceful," she said. "That's better." Lucy was silent for a few seconds. Then she whispered, "I am too." After the call, Mira stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere across town, Grant was beginning a different kind of hearing, the private one that starts after public consequences, when there is no judge to interrupt and no attorney to translate. Only the unbearable echo of your own choices playing back without editing. Maybe he would learn. Maybe he wouldn't. That part was no longer hers to manage. What belonged to her now was simpler and harder and finally honest. She would find a larger place. She would help Lucy choose paint for a real bedroom wall. She would teach Eli how to make pancakes without burning the edges. She would keep working. She would rebuild the years that had been spoken over. And one day, when the children were old enough to understand the difference between conflict and truth, she would tell them the story carefully. Not the cruelest version, not the ugliest details. Just enough for them to know that their mother did not win because someone rescued her at the last minute. She won because she learned. She learned what money hides. She learned what paper reveals. She learned that the person smiling at your weakness is sometimes only smiling because they have not yet realized you stopped being weak a long time ago. And she learned that when someone spends years trying to shrink your world, the most powerful answer is not always noise. Sometimes it is skill. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is a single piece of evidence at the exact right time. Sometimes it is walking into court alone, letting them laugh, and then watching the room change when the truth finally speaks in its own voice. So if this story hits you where it hurts, if you know what it feels like to be dismissed, narrated, underestimated,
or quietly cornered until even your own future starts feeling borrowed. Don't just move on from this one like it was another courtroom story. Sit with it. Because there are people listening right now who are still in the middle of their worst chapter. And they need to hear that a calm comeback is still a comeback. They need to hear that being broke is not the same as being powerless. They need to hear that private preparation can shake public arrogance harder than any argument ever will.
If you want Grant's family to finally face the full truth about what he did behind all that polished confidence, comment justice. And if you want the hidden years, the late nights, the receipts, the cloud files, the silent rebuild Mira never showed anyone, comment reveal. Because some people think the story ends when they laugh at you in public. But the real story begins when the evidence starts talking back.